Hello and welcome to the Grand Prix 24/7 podcast. This is officially our Sakhir Grand Prix preview, but such has been the avalanche of driver market news that we thought we'd kind of focus on that primarily. Of course, we found out earlier this week that Lewis Hamilton would be unavailable for the Sakhir Grand Prix after testing positive for COVID-19. And obviously today, on Wednesday, we found out that George Russell would be his replacement. So we'll talk about that in addition to the Haas driver news. With Russell moving over to Mercedes, he'll also be replaced by Jack Aitken in the Williams. So yeah, absolutely loads to talk about, and I'll be joined with Ben and Paul to discuss it. Ben, just going to you first. What a day of news in Formula One. How excited are you for this race?
Yeah, my head has just been spinning for basically 24 hours straight at this point. And as we discussed off air, this has turned this upcoming Sakhir Grand Prix, in which there are almost no sort of championship ramifications, into arguably the most exciting race of the year. So yeah, there's absolutely a lot to discuss and a lot to look forward to.
Paul, I think that the big story here is the Hamilton being out and George Russell replacing him. Are you surprised by the decision from Williams to even let Russell go? Is this the right decision from Mercedes?
Well, first of all, like Ben, it's been like an explosive week. The Hamilton news, and I just, all of us I know wish him well. He has a good recovery. But at the same time, one man's misfortune is another man's fantastic opportunity. And, the community, everybody across the board was calling for Russell to be in that car. There were a couple of other candidates, I'm sure, but, Toto Wolff, the sportsman that he is, has really put the cat among the pigeons, because Russell's going to answer a hell of a lot of questions that we've all been asking. First of all, he hasn't scored a point in his career. This is the opportunity to do so. And I think I'm going to put myself out on a limb and say he's probably going to get a podium. And I'd even say, if you want a real fairy tale, the Netflix episode of Note, then I say he maybe wins the race. But he's got the tools to do it. And Max Verstappen said there's 5 or 6 guys or 7 guys on the grid who would win with that car. So we're going to see. So many answers are going to be revealed this weekend. And that's just, probably the main show. But the reality is there's a lot of other stuff going on. So unbelievable week ahead and a week gone by. So very, very pumped.
I do think that we need some kind of circumspection when we analyse the way that Russell does. Obviously, he's an incredibly talented driver. He won an incredibly competitive Formula 2 season and has shown in Williams, by out-qualifying his teammate in every single race so far in his career, that he's a very fast driver. However, it's going to be a difficult challenge for him just to jump into the Mercedes and go up against Valtteri Bottas. This is a driver in Bottas who has been matching Hamilton near enough in qualifying. He doesn't quite have the race pace that Hamilton does, but he's a very, very fast qualifier and a driver who's very highly rated before going to Mercedes. So I don't want to see, people putting too much pressure on Russell. If he can go in there, get within 0.3 of Bottas, he's done a fantastic job.
Well, like you, I think expecting, I would hope for a podium and results like that, but expecting that might be a bit too far. It's kind of tricky to predict these things, because obviously we've got Nico Hulkenberg's time replacing the Racing Point driver as an example of what it's like to stand in, but the comparison isn't exactly the same, because Russell's been driving the 2020 cars all season. Even though his car has been a Williams, there are sort of, more understanding with the tyres and, general just characteristics of a car. It's got a car with a Mercedes engine in it, so those sort of things. So that might help him get up to speed a bit quicker than Mercedes, which is why it's very possible that we have, a really strong result. But yeah, if he's just within shouting distance of Bottas and, he doesn't make any mistakes, I think that would be a very encouraging performance for him.
He obviously does have some simulator experience, and I don't think he's driven the W11, but he has driven previous iterations of Mercedes Championship winning cars. So he definitely has a decent shot at getting in there quickly and impressing. And I guess it's just a thing to note that, he's never actually driven in Formula One really in the pack so much, especially not near the front. This season, more than last, he's obviously been kind of towards the back and battling with Haas and Alfa Romeo, whereas last season, obviously, he was right at the back with just his teammate. So it will be fascinating to see how he gets on in that sense. I just hope that the expectations aren't so high on him, because he's this highly rated driver and everyone thinks the Mercedes is a a car that anyone could get in and drive. I just hope that pressure doesn't get put on him too much. Paul, just talk about this from Valtteri Bottas's perspective. Obviously, this is both a chance to prove himself as being a very, very capable driver, but also a chance for him to get shown up a little bit. How do you think he should approach this, and do you think he'll be scared?
Oh no, I think this is a big measure for Valtteri. He's a very, very fast driver and a good driver. He hasn't got the measure of Lewis Hamilton at any point, but the reality is he is still a very, very solid driver, and he makes Lewis work very hard. So that's a great benchmark to have. But I'm going to be romantic about it, and I'm going to actually put myself out on a limb again and say I think Russell's going to be there on the button immediately. I think if you have a good car, which I think the Mercedes is, it's not a good car, it's a fantastic car. I think you'll adapt very quickly. If you recall, a year ago, I believe it was, when he tested in Bahrain for Mercedes, he topped the session. Nikita Mazepin also topped the session, which shows you how good the car is. I don't believe that there will be a problem for him. I mean, unless there's sort of very strange conditions. The only thing that might be a factor is the ultra-fast, very short layout, which I think will impact all the drivers. But I really see Russell, put it this way, I think knowing a kid like George Russell, if he doesn't come out of there with a podium, he's going to be disappointed. So I would imagine that would be his focus, and anything can happen then, So also, it's basically, if Mercedes was doomed if they do and doomed if they don't kind of thing, because by doing this, they're actually going to show, is this car the weapon that anyone can win with, or does a guy have to work hard, or if Bottas had another teammate apart from Lewis, would that other teammate give him a run-in for the money in the same car? And I think that's a lot of very, very cool questions that are going to just be answered because of Lewis's misfortune.
There are going to be a lot of questions answered this weekend. I just think that based on one race with Russell just jumping in, I do think that we need to, there does need to be some consideration, and there are lots of different variables going on, and I don't think this is going to be giving us the same answer as a whole season with them in the team. But for George Russell, this is obviously an incredibly big chance for him, not only to get his first points in Formula One, but to show to Mercedes that he has what it takes. And if he gets a very good result here and actually challenges Bottas, Ben, do you think that 2022 Mercedes seat is his to lose?
Yeah, well, I think it already was his to lose. So any sort of solid performance here would, almost seal it for him. I would think. And actually, it's funny because the man who really this seat's come at the expense of, Stoffel Van Dorn. It does remind me a little bit of when Van Dorn stepped in for Fernando Alonso, I believe, at the Bahrain GP in 2016. I want to say it was. And he got in the points in his first race, and that was like, he was very highly regarded before that, but then he'd proved it, and then it was like, it's a matter of time until he's in the car. I would assume it's going to be the same thing here with George.
There was that famous time when Mika Salo took over from Michael Schumacher after he crashed at the British Grand Prix. I think broke his leg. I think that was 1999. If I remember correctly, the first race he ran, Irvine won, and he finished ninth, so he was out of the points. I think it was only 6 points. And then the next weekend at Hockenheim, he was leading. Mika Salo was leading the race, and actually he could have won it, but he pulled aside and he let Irvine win. And I don't know, about how many years later, probably almost a decade later, I spoke to him and I asked him about that. And he said, yeah, I've thought about it often, but the reality is since that day, Ferrari have always looked after me. And actually, he did have a GTE career with them, and he became like the ambassador, and he drove the Maserati. So yes, there was an opportunity to win, and he didn't take it because he wanted to help the other guy. So it was quite interesting that there is some kind of parallels, but it took two races, as you rightly say. It's going to be difficult for George, but again, a lot of people are predicting greatness for George. Max Verstappen showed us what he can do when they pop him up onto a good car. Do you remember? That was the last one. It wasn't very long ago. Max was in the Toro Rosso. Boom, they stuck him in the Red Bull. Boom, he won it. Okay, against Daniel Ricciardo, who was no slouch. So this is George Russell's Max Verstappen moment, and let's see if he can grasp it. I mean, he has to. That's the reality. The bottom line is, I said podium. George wants to win this thing, because if he wins this thing, then Mercedes have got a problem.
There's definitely precedent of drivers just jumping into a car for their first race and impressing.
But I'll ask you this question. It's argument's sake. This season's been so boring. Lewis just walked away from it. Let's say for argument's sake, it ends in this way. George gets in the car, puts it on pole or puts it second on the grid, wins the race. I want to know what's going to happen then.
Well, I mean, I think Mercedes would probably need more evidence than just that, because obviously it really does depend on the circumstances. If he's just completely...
If he wins the race, mate. If he wins the race, think about it. He gets out of a Williams wheelbarrow, gets into a decent car, and he wins the race. I'm just saying hypothetically.
I don't think it changes anything. It doesn't change anything for 2021, does it, though? I mean, it's Valtteri's contract. It's just 2022. It would become almost a short.
Yeah, but Formula One contracts.
Yeah,
right?
but the thing as well is that
right?
that relationship with Lewis clearly works. And if you're putting a guy in who's faster than Valtteri, and that's provably so, well, that risks upsetting the sort of balance with Lewis, doesn't it?
I think my opinion on this is that regardless of whether George Russell is able to win or not, there is a huge amount of PR value to Mercedes winning an 8th championship and Lewis Hamilton winning his 8th championship with Mercedes. So I don't think that they'll want to upset the order before then. I do think that it would make sense. Russell's contracted to 2021 with Williams. Bottas is contracted 2021 with Mercedes. I just think it would make sense to keep it for another year, and then Russell comes into the seat in 2022. Obviously, that's going to be difficult for people to stomach, especially if Russell goes in and beats Bottas and wins the race. But let's see him do it first, and then I think it's going to be a very difficult challenge. I think that maybe some people are underestimating Bottas if they think that Russell will just get in there straight away and beat him. But it'll be fascinating to see, and I'm really excited to it. But let's move on, because obviously with Russell out of Williams, he's been replaced by Jack Aitken. An opportunity for Aitken to kind of prove that he is Formula One quality. And again, Ben, a bit of pressure on Nicholas Latifi, who's not had a great season.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think the pressure on Latifi is substantially more than it is on Bottas. Latifi basically has to prove that he's F1 quality at all, and he hasn't done that yet. And if Jack Aitken comes in, who is no slouch and is very much one of those guys who I think slipped through the cracks a little bit. He's still in Formula 2. Realistically, it doesn't seem like he's got the backing to get to F1, but he's had some very good results in there. He's won a few races. If he shows up Latifi, well, that's disastrous. Latifi gets away with sort of, I think, not too much criticism because it's the back of the grid and it's Williams, and it doesn't really matter who's in that car, I suppose. But he'd definitely be in for a lot of the same treatment Lance Stroll's getting if Aitken shows him up.
I think that Latifi definitely gets away with it a little bit. This season, he's been significantly outqualified by George Russell. Obviously, if Russell then goes on and beats Bottas and suddenly people are rating him as one on the best drivers on the grid, then it doesn't look so bad. But if Jack Aitken can come and jump in a Williams and beat Latifi, then he is under some serious pressure. Paul, Aitken's a driver I think that has been unlucky perhaps in F2, never kind of quite being at the best team. But do you think that he can be a serious challenger to Latifi and maybe put his name kind of back on the radar of some of the Formula One teams?
Now, if you look at Formula 2, I would say that the top 10 kids there all are Formula One material. They're potential Formula One material, and Jack Aitken's the same thing. It's how these kids seize the moment. So a lot of guys have shone amazingly in the lower series, and others have not done so well. I mean, and they come to Formula One and suddenly they become stars. And I think with George and with Jack, it's their seize the moment opportunity, and how they deal with it will be fascinating. I would expect him to get the better of Latifi, although Latifi's been in the car all season. It'll be a tough ask to drive that car, but again, seize the moment, and I look forward to that also as a sideshow. But in terms of career-wise, it's pretty much the same thing. This is Jack Aitken's opportunity to go from zero actually to hero, and let's see how that pans out.
Yeah, that's the thing. It really is that opportunity to just take a single chance, and that can kind of almost change your entire career trajectory. You think if Aitken can come in and handily beat Latifi, then suddenly he's being seen as a completely different style of prospect. Same thing with George Russell. Obviously, he's very highly rated, but if he's beating Bottas, then people are considering, one of the best drivers on the grid. So it really is about just taking this kind of freak opportunity that pretty much wouldn't happen or be given to you in any other season, and just taking and making the most of it, and doing your best and showing people what you can do. But I guess the final piece of big news is that Haas have announced their entirely new driver lineup, and that is going to be Nikita Mazepin and Mick Schumacher. They will be driving for Haas in 2021, both of which are currently in F2. Mick Schumacher, of course, leading the championship, and Nikita Mazepin is third. Ben, I think this has kind of been predictable for a few weeks now, but what do you make of it nonetheless?
Yeah, predictable's an understatement. It's been the worst kept secret in F1, I think. Basically, everyone knew that this was going to happen. That Mick and Nikita were going to be in those seats, and so now it's just been confirmed. Nevertheless, it's very interesting. I think there's a lot to be gained and a lot to be lost for both these guys, because you can make cases for both of them that they're there for things other than their ability. Or their ability isn't as good as other people in F2 who they might be going up against. But you can also make cases that, particularly in Mick's case, obviously he's leading the F2 championship, that there's a lot of ability there too. So one way or another, we should find out next year what it is, and that's the exciting part. At the same time, I will say I do feel a little bit sorry for Callum Ilott, who, is very much in that F2 championship fight in second. He's 14 points behind Mick. And has now been ruled out. That's a bit of a shame. I think ideally most people would say it would be Mick and Ilott, not Mazepin, in that seat. But obviously money talks. But that's just the way motorsport is. But yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how they both go, and hopefully they can also finish the F2 season on a high.
Yeah, I think the Mick decision is pretty simple. He's leading the Formula 2 championship. He's the son of Michael Schumacher. He's a Ferrari Academy driver. It just makes total sense. And I think it would have been a huge surprise if he hadn't given that seat, even if he doesn't end up winning the championship, just because of everything that his driving has proved, but also just everything that comes with him being Mick Schumacher. The situation with Mazepin is a difficult one, because obviously I agree with you. I think Ilott's a better driver, and Ilott's proven this season to be probably the better driver, because he's second in the championship. He's been the closest challenger to Mick Schumacher. But at the same time, Nikita Mazepin is in his second year in F2. He's third in the championship. He's beating a very experienced teammate in Luca Giotto. He's definitely not a bad driver. And I think that potentially because he's rich, some of his credentials have been underplayed. But I definitely think he's a good driver. It is the way that these things work, unfortunately. I think we'd all like it to be purely on merit, but that isn't the case. And obviously, with his dad having plenty of money, that is going to be a huge boost to Haas, who basically haven't been able to put updates on their car this season. So even if they think that maybe Ilott's a tenth quicker, if Mazepin can bring money into the team and help them develop the car more, then maybe that's actually worth more, even in terms of lap time. So it's a difficult balance to have. So I want to see Mazepin compete and see how he does before we start writing him off. And obviously, if he goes in there and is quicker than Mick Schumacher, then maybe a lot of people will be eating their words. But I'm definitely interested to see how it plays out. Paul, what's your assessment of the situation?
3 billionaire kids on the grid. How can you compete? If you're a millionaire father who's just trying to get your son into Formula One, they've just upped the ante. You need to be a billionaire. It's crazy. It's crazy that, But I think I agree with you. With Mazepin, I'm impressed with him. I think he always gets that resentment in a kind of Lance Stroll kind of way. But I think he's got a good program behind him. They've given him a lot of testing. I don't want to put this on the record, but I do believe he's done some sort of independent testing, pretty much like Lance Stroll did with Williams, and I believe they did it with Mercedes. We did report that, although there's been no feedback if that actually did happen, but I'm sure it did. And I think the kid is really well prepared, and he really came of age at the last end of the season. So, yes, he deserves it. I like many, I was quite surprised that, first of all, Mick didn't go to Alfa Romeo. and replace Giovinazzi or that other guy, the old guy, what's his name, Kimi. But they didn't. They thought, okay, we'll keep those two plonkers there, and we'll put. And this to me is, I don't get it. I mean, it's a Binotto thing. This call comes from Binotto. How can they put Mick Schumacher with Mazepin? It just doesn't make sense. In the Haas, two rookies, they've never been in Formula One. Surely you would have then stuck Giovinazzi in the Haas or Kimi in the Haas and at least have two experienced guys with. You've got these two rookies from Formula 2 going to drive a Haas, which is notoriously be rubbish. If you think about it, two of the most experienced guys in Formula 1, Magnussen and Grosjean, can't drive that thing. And that thing nearly blew up the other day too. Seriously, if I'm Mattia Binotto and I'm looking at the bigger picture, I'm wondering, why are they putting Mick Schumacher at Haas with Nikita Mazepin? I don't get that. To me, it just does not make sense. I'm surprised that the tight-knit Mick Schumacher clan that really protect him and done a fantastic job getting up to here have actually accepted to go to Haas with a rookie. I really think that's a really poor decision. Mick needed to be next to Kimi. That would have been the ideal situation. And put Giovinazzi in the Haas if you have to keep him. And then at least he can guide Mazepin. But putting, I don't know, guys. Just correct me if I'm wrong. Just say, look, you're a senile old idiot and you don't know what you're talking about. But
no, I think that's definitely the way to go. It just makes sense from so many angles for Mick to be paired with Kimi. Experience, the relationship, and the stories going back. It's great marketing to have Kimi with the next generation of Schumacher, all those things. If you're really trying to give him the best shot, you want someone for him to learn from, surely. And you're not going to learn from a guy who's learning on the job at the same time you are. So, yeah, it's very strange. And then the question that kind of comes to that, Paul, is, I guess, well, then why is Giovinazzi still there? And we don't really have a good answer for that.
Really, they've put Mick in the wrong team. I'm going to put it out there that for sure. This is just, and it starts at the very top of Ferrari. Okay, those two guys, Alkin, who's just totally out of his depth, the other guy, I even forget his name. Camilleri doesn't even pitch up. That's why I don't remember his name. At least I remember Marchioni because he was always there. At least I remember De Montezomolo. He was always there. These two other guys, you don't even know their names. You know what I'm saying? And I'm an editor of a site, but on the fly, I can't even mention them. And then they've got Binotto there with a car that's like a boat and two drivers. They're bringing in a Spaniard who they think is going to be number 2, but he's there coming to kick the ass of the Monaco kid, and they give Vettel the boot. Mate, Ferrari are they're a disaster, and they're the architects of what I believe is the wrong plan for Mick Schumacher's first year in Formula One. And I put it out there. Let them take me off the media's list. I don't care.
I think the only logic I can see behind the decision to put Schumacher and Mazepin together is just to try and get a benchmark of how good they are against each other. But I completely agree. I think that Schumacher would do much better alongside Kimi Räikkönen. I think also that comparing him to Kimi Räikkönen would give a good benchmark of how good Schumacher is compared to an experienced Formula One driver. It's a very strange decision. I agree that Giovinazzi hasn't done enough to prove that he deserves a spot in F1. I think that with Mazepin's money, I don't know if there's a financial thing with having the publicity of Schumacher and the potential sponsorship he brings that Haas would have wanted more than Alfa Romeo. It's a strange situation, and I completely agree. I don't think this is the best for Mick Schumacher's development. I don't think that this is the best for Mazepin's development either, because you've got two rookies who haven't driven in Formula One before, and they're going to be struggling and learning the ropes in terms of setting up the car, providing feedback, and it just surely would make a lot more sense to have someone who's already done that for a number of years alongside them. But that's obviously the decision that's been made, and we'll have to see how it plays out.
And arguably the worst car on the grid.
In qualifying, it certainly is. Russell's always out-qualifying both the Haas drivers, and I think that Raikkonen and Giovinazzi on a good day are. It's just that those two are a bit inconsistent, had a few errors in qualifying. But if they get a good lap in, it seems that they are beating the Haas. So, yeah, it's a pretty baffling situation. I guess that they obviously still rate Giovinazzi, and that's why they've kept him. And obviously Kimi, I don't think is going to get thrown out on his ear. I think he kind of he'll leave the sport when he thinks it's right for him to go. So I'm absolutely fascinated to see how things will go at Haas next year. But in the absence of Romain Grosjean, Haas have obviously had to call up Pietro Fittipaldi to replace him. Ben, it's a famous name, obviously, but this represents a wonderful opportunity for Pietro to showcase his skills on the biggest stage. And of course, it's nice to see a Fittipaldi back on the grid.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's slightly different with him because I don't think anyone's necessarily viewing him as a long-term prospect for any particular F1 team, but it would be nice to sort of, keep the Fittipaldi name around F1 circles. So any sort of solid performance here, maybe points is probably a bit too much to expect from anyone in their first race, but especially in that Haas. But we'll see, if he can give a good account of himself, keep himself relatively close to Kevin Magnussen, who's no slouch, at least when it comes to pace. Be interesting to see how he does.
Paul, you're probably old enough to remember his grandfather, Emerson Fittipaldi, racing in Formula One. So I imagine this is a slightly weird experience for you.
Yeah, no, proudly so. I did. I actually met his father at Kyalami. But that's another story for another day. Pietro Fittipaldi, look, the last fantastic thing he did was in 2017 when he won the World Series Formula V8 3.5. Yes, I'm reading this off his thing. But other than that, he's really hasn't done much. He had six outings with Dale Coyne Racing in IndyCar, didn't impress. And he did some DTM in 2019. So yeah, that's a bit out of the blue. Let's see what he does. It's I don't think it's a huge sensational story like the other two that we've been discussing. George Russell and the whole Mick Schumacher thing and Jack Aiken. But the reality is that he's got the drive. Let's see what he can bring to the party.
Just some kind of final thoughts on the Bahrain Grand Prix. The Sakhir Grand Prix. Without Lewis Hamilton, strangely enough, this is probably going to be one of the most exciting races of the season. Ben, just some final thoughts on the race. What are you hoping to see, and what do you think is a kind of reasonable expectation for Russell and Aitken?
Well, I'm hoping to see a very close fight at the front, and I'm hoping the characteristics of the track sort of encourage that, where we're going to have cars, following each other a lot and closely and able to get by. And I hope, even though the characteristics might not suit Red Bull, I hope that Max is able to sort of get amongst it, at least more than he has in last few previous races. In terms of Russell, yeah, I think, as Paul says, a podium is the goal. Whether it's realistic, it's very hard to say. And it wouldn't be surprising if he struggles for whatever reason, just the car doesn't suit him this first weekend. And that's the thing we should mention as well. Like, there's a very realistic possibility he's there next weekend, which I think the expectations would go up in that case. But he could struggle here. He could also be right on it. But yeah, podium is what he should be aiming for. Hopefully he's higher. Hopefully we get a three-way fight between Russell, Bottas, and Verstappen. That would be fantastic, but I guess we'll see. And then in terms of Aitken, yeah, just putting the screws to Latifi. That's what he's got to do, and prove that both to Joe Schmoes like us who are watching at home, but also potentially a big sponsor which could get him to a better team for F2 or get him into F1 in his own right. He can put together a solid performance there as well.
Yeah, I agree. For Aitken, it's just about putting his name on the map. Obviously, for people who watch Formula 2 every week, he's a highly rated driver and someone that a lot of people like. But to the wider audience, he's probably not as well known. So I think, it's just a great opportunity for him to go and get his name out there. And this is potentially the chance he needed to keep that Formula 1 dream alive. In terms of Russell, I think it'll be very interesting if he can kind of get within 0.3. This is a target that's been set for Alex Albon at Red Bull all season, and he can't do it within Max. But if he can get within 0.3 of Bottas, then it's going to be showing up his old mate Alex Albon as well a little bit. So yeah, I think that if he can get anywhere near Bottas in qualifying and then is able to beat out Albon and get on the podium, then I think he's done a brilliant job, especially just jumping in that car, one that he's never driven before. Paul, give you the final word.
I'd put $100 on George Russell winning the Grand Prix. Okay, I would. Seriously, if I was a betting man, I'd put $100 on it. I really. I mean, I don't know what they'll give him, like not very good odds, but I'm telling you that that's what I'd like to do, because yes, there's the romantic in me that says it, but I just do believe Mercedes have a fantastic, fantastic car, and it's not to underscore what Lewis has done or what, but it's to say that Russell is actually at a level where he can bring in, and I hope he's going to prove that to us. I hope he is. If he's not, then move on. Then we have to look out for the next guy. But I think George has got leadership qualities in him. He's mature. He was one of the first guys to tweet after the crash. You know, he's just on another level, and it would be fantastic to see him succeed. And I'm a believer. I think he will succeed in this car, and I'm going to put it out there that he wins, and that's going to be the main thing. But of course, there's Max Verstappen, who of course is like him. You know, is the new generation that we're so well served with, and Bottas, Bottas' career's on the line here. You know, really, he has to beat George. He has to. It's not even negotiable. So there's a lot of needle, and as Ben says, it's the most exciting Grand Prix of the weekend. Jack Aiken, well, yeah, they're so far back, I don't even take notice of those guys. But yeah, good. If he can do what Russell did and actually show himself in the next race or two, then fantastic. Whereas, as you say, if Lewis is away for 2 races, then perhaps, you know, this one, the wise guy in George will just learn the ropes and then try hit a home run at the last race if he gets 2 shots at it. But definitely a fantastic weekend ahead, and of course we can't forget this track. This track could actually change everything. You know that, right? It's like going to be a sub 1 minute lap, and it's going to be chaos and mayhem. So throw that into it, and I think we were one of the most exciting Grand Prix I can remember ever.
Yeah, let's hope so. And let's hope that we don't see something that ends up disappointing us all, because I think we've all very much got our hopes up now. But my final word probably be, as someone myself who's from Norfolk, it'd be great to see George Russell deliver the Grand Prix for Norfolk that Martin Brundle never could, and get us a Grand Prix victory. But we'll have to wait and see. We'll talk to you after the race on Sunday, and hopefully we'll be reviewing one of the greatest races in Formula One history, as we've just been building up to. Even if it's not the greatest race ever, just the second greatest race ever, I'll take that. But we'll speak to you then.